White Centipede Noise Podcast, where we give language to noise. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Kevin Yuen of SUTEKH HEXEN, an experimental noise-heavy black metal project based in the Bay Area that features a large cast of rotating collaborators. Their new album Primeval is out now on Cyclic Law and Breath, Sun, Bone, Blood. Kevin also has a solo dark ambient project called Eerie Armor and runs the label In Solace Publishing. He shared some download codes for SUTEKH HEXEN and Eerie Armor that Patreon supporters at the WCN TV tier can access now. This, by the way, is part 1 of the full-length episode with Kevin. To watch or listen to the full episode, go to patreon.com/whitecentipedeNoise. We recorded today's episode a few weeks ago while I was still getting set up here, but as you can see, the record shop at WCN Studios is now up and running and open to the public. You can find tons of rare and out-of-print noise here, White Centipede Noise releases, and new stuff is coming in all the time. The stock here will be available in-store only for the most part, but I will be doing a one-time online shopping session this weekend for Patreon supporters at the physical copies level. I also want to let you all know that I made some changes to the White Centipede Noise Discord server and added some forum channels. So now it's really able to function as a dynamic noise forum and community discussion space. All Patreon supporters and podcast guests are invited to join us there. This episode is sponsored by Rural Isolation Project. Visit ruralisolationproject.com and keep your eye out for new releases soon, including the new Howard Stelzer album, 5,000 Pretenders Who Passed the Test by Luck Alone. Now on to Kevin. Hello, Kevin. Welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast.
Hey, Oscar. How you doing?
Good. Good morning. Thank you for joining me so early. Why don't you go ahead and just briefly introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners before we jump in with the deeper questions of who you are and what you do generally artistically.
Sure. Well, my name is Kevin. I play guitar in SUTEKH HEXEN, electronics in another project, newer project, Eerie Armor. I also professionally, I am a graphic designer and art director, which I've done for many years at this point, primarily in publishing, in the publishing industry. And prior to that, for bands, just basically giving identity to friends' bands and just various bands, underground projects, or that's still that's where my heart is.
So SUTEKH HEXEN is the project that I'm most familiar with from you and that I associate you with. And you said you play guitar in it. Is that kind of an understatement? I mean, I understand that as being kind of your creative project, and it's I guess, correct me if I'm wrong or oversimplifying it, but it's a black metal project, very experimental and noisy black metal project that incorporates a lot of collaborators and other people, kind of a rotating cast, it seems. But you're the head of that, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I do more than guitar. I do shortchange myself on that, but that's fine. Guitar was pretty much the first instrument for a search for, and in that band in particular, it's guitar and electronics, and but when it's live, it's just friends who can, I'll dole out the tasks, whoever's up for it and capable. That when it comes to just fleshing out the ideas, I already kind of had an idea of what it should be, and it's my capability. I will make it happen, or at least communicate that to somebody who is.
Does that mean your recordings are mostly solo, or were mostly solo?
No, they were never solo. And the ideas sometimes start out solo. Some of the tracks have started out as solo tracks, and it just worked out. It sounded like a message. So I mean, there are songs, there are ideas. Like on this most recent album, Fine Either, the final track is something that I wrote when I was 15 years old. I have an acoustic guitar.
Oh.
And that was in the late 90s.
Cool. So tell me about this album, Primeval. I was listening to it today, and it came out early 2025, correct? And What sets it apart from previous SUTEKH HEXEN works or albums?
It's completely acoustic.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't really. I guess I didn't really realize that that was really the truth, but I did notice there's. I did get the sense there's much more acoustic instrumentation and composition than I've heard on
yeah,
previous stuff.
it's completely acoustic. The instrumentation down to the noise track. Um, it was an idea, just this conceptual idea I had for ages, and it worked out really well. And just the clarity of the instrumentation, I I think is the difference. And it's funny because a few reviews, it's got a lot of positive reviews. I think that's the main difference.
It has
Um, yeah, it has.
compared to previous stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think one of the things I keep reading is, oh, the structure, the composition, and nothing is really different in regards to that, other than it strips away all the electronics, right? So,
It lifts the veil kind of on the structure of the songs that was maybe always there.
right, it's always there. Nothing radically different had changed, other than the fact that it's acoustic instrumentation. I mean, more time was spent, but that's pretty much it.
So with this album, I noticed, yeah, like quite a large list of other members, other instrumentation, as with most of your albums, and you know, in December, you were here in Berlin, touring with Trepanningsritualen and
Curse All Kings.
Curse All Kings, and Sam Torres from Terracell Unit and Crawl of Time was with you as a member, as
Mhm.
well as another fellow who I'm
Uh,
not super
Lucas from Infinite Suma.
right. And so those are both heavy electronics, noise, industrial artists. Were they on the album as well? This album?
Well, Lucas's Sam was was supposed to be, but he had a lot of other obligations, creative obligations, so it was hard to get him involved. We were actually on the way to pick him up, but then he was in the middle of trapping something else, so
Okay.
we were not going to peel him away from that, because the nature of it always is, if you're available and you're tapped, come on in. But if you have, your primary thing going on, that's, you are in the kitchen,
Yeah.
focus on that.
Yeah. Okay. So even though that noisier artists were involved, maybe not Sam in the recording, but in the touring, um, the approach was still much more, I don't want to say traditional, but the instrumentation was much more acoustic and traditional. And so you had these guys doing things that were not their typical fare. Is that accurate?
Um, Not really. I think the thing that is not typical for them is that they don't really play in bands. Not that this is a typical band. Um, they Terracil Unit's a band.
Right.
It's a duo. Infinite Tune is solo. Call Time is solo. Majority of the things that those guys have always done are basically individual solo projects. So I think, like, for them to play in a group setting, a larger group setting, larger collaborative live group setting, was pretty atypical for them. And especially in rehearsals, is that's something that we would talk about, because we would rely on cues.
Yeah.
Uh, and, funny enough, Sam he's fully electronics, and he was kind of the metronome at this point. And so he would say, yeah, we I'm here to keep us honest in terms of like timing. So it's like, if if we fuck up, we know who it is because it's not me. Because he has a sequence, and you know I have to keep
Oh,
count.
was he using his electronic sequences as the?
He had his iPad with some of the apps that would have timed playback, but the way we had it was not always live. Some of the triggers, but there was a track that we played, or two tracks that we played in Europe that had like a percussive element. So obviously that would not be like a it was a
Yeah,
sequence toy guy.
got it.
So we would have to be pretty on,
Right.
and just make sure that there's the visual cues.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we didn't play any of the material from Primeval. Say none of it. It was all fully traditional material.
Oh, you
Some old
didn't on this tour,
tracks.
so you didn't play the stuff from.
Yeah,
Okay, because I was gonna ask that because that was we were talking about this beforehand. And I had Sam on recently as for an afterblast kind of, and we talked about this some elements of this tour. But like, firstly, like the stupid frustration of like being in almost the same city, kind of on the other side of the world as like a friend or a a band that you want to see or whatever, and still not managing to meet up because it was like the one night of the week that I had, or one night of the month, or like the last 3 months that I had actually something that like I couldn't rearrange or squeeze out of. So I was like, oh, Sam and Kevin and those guys are playing, you know, in town, but I just can't go, and that's just how it is.
yeah,
So I was really curious about how what the live sound looked and sounded like, particularly after like listening to Primeval, because the previous SUTEKH stuff that I'm familiar with is like quite noisy and electronic, and I could
mhm,
kind of maybe see how that could be adapted live. But the Primeval stuff is very, I mean, it's produced very differently, and I thought, wow, was Sam, doing this in a live setting like that and making it sound so clean and kind of atmospheric? Or but so you're telling me that the live stuff wasn't Primeval?
yeah. Not
Okay.
yet, not yet. Yeah, everybody that's involved is capable of it. We would just have to figure out that live adaptation.
Scream and Writhe presents a series of off-season Initial Shock shows in Montreal. March 1st at Maison, Bloomer, Taskmaster, Primitive Isolation Tactics, Generic Fatigue. March 28th at Casa del Popolo, Green Tea, Jute, High Grove, Ingress, Miox. April 25th at Petite Hours, Nyan, Shadow Pattern, Zach Roden, Skin, Foul. Keep an eye out for another Initial Shock presentation at the Suoni per il Popolo Fest in June, followed by the third edition of the Initial Shock Noise Fest, the weekend of July 5th and 6th. Full fest details to be announced in the spring. Sign up for the mailing list at screamandride.com or follow at screamandride or at Initial Shock MTL on Instagram to stay in the loop. What does SUTEKH HEXEN look like live, and what does it sound like live? How would you describe it?
What does it look like live? It's typically a trio, and we play in pretty much low light, very low light. We run a smoke machine. Initially it was kind of a sensory deprivation experiment, but along with just the raw atmospheric black metal and those elements on a just stripping everything away visually and just kind of having the participants focus on the sound rather than you could what's going on around them, and what's going on stage. Because when we go to shows, it's just a sensory overload, and often there have been times where you know throughout my life at shows I'm guilty of just being a little more aware of what's going on around me than what's happening, what the point of why I'm there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a
Are you speaking like socially, like within the audience, or like within the space to people around you? So you're saying you fill the room with smoke in order to kind of
strip
dispel
away,
that?
yeah, to bring you more into individual space.
Mm.
because shows are very social, right?
Yeah.
And as humans, I think we're kind of heightened just being around each other, whether it's on a search level or on an anxious and anxiety level. So, and it's maybe the same for us, up there.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's really just stripping everything away, and then at the same time cycling everything forward with the sound and sensation. But it's usually just like two or three silhouettes stumbling
Yeah.
around on stage, giving cues.
You have guitar, and what are the other members usually playing?
Uh,
Electronics?
yeah. So as far as electronics, synthesizers,
Okay.
more. So
Usually not a drummer?
there was a point where there was a drummer, a very brief point where we had a drummer, but it just did not feel right. So it's typically electronics and guitar. Electronics being synthesizers at this point, modular synths, but always tabletop stuff.
It's interesting what you said about the live experience and kind of using a smoke effect or something like that to change that from what it typically is, because that is something I don't want to say I have a problem with live music or live noise, but it heavily colors the experience, which is not always bad. I mean, of course, like that's why people love live concerts, and that's why you go to live concerts, is to have that kind of sometimes have that communal experience or that group experience. But it does change the way you're able to perceive things, and
Right.
in a number of ways. And similar to on I'm maybe in the minority that I also find like watching movies in a theater and cinema isn't always appropriate for me, because I feel like, it just changes the way you
Yeah.
experience things. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Like a serious film, people tend to laugh or chuckle. Like if I've watched films alone, then I've watched them in cinemas with a group of people, and it's different. Just the proximity to other people, and I think everyone's awareness of each other. And I think unease, people are also more, I don't know if it's insecurity or they're self conscious, or they 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 do little things that kind of resonate then with everyone around them to try to kind of ease their maybe
Hmm.
discomfort in some moments. And like I said, that's not always bad. That's not always,
Yeah.
for some
Yeah.
types of music or some types of experiences, that's ideal. But for sometimes it's really not. And so the at least for noise, the opinion that live noise is the only way or that's the best way or whatever, I think for a number of reasons, I think it has some pitfalls to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. In some ways, yeah, it depends on what it is. Most of the noise shows that I've been to, uh, it's one of the rawest experiences, right? In so many ways, uh, whether it's in a basement, an art gallery, uh, these days, bigger venues, even. But it's just it feels like a house party,
Yeah.
a high volume house party. And yeah, early on, it was always just a consideration, just a more like theatrical approach. I like the skating wall hitting me, but at the same time, like I don't want to look over and see, this guy going through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's fine, but yeah, maybe I don't know, I'll just need a blind days.
Was there a reason with this new album, Primeval, that you decided to go in this more stripped down acoustic direction? Was there a specific reason for this?
Honestly, aside from being on the list of conceptual obligations, personal conceptual obligations for the band, I think I had to kind of, for me, it was just proving that it's possible, you know,
Yeah.
just kind of being in this apocalyptic mindset that so many of us have probably always been in, or some recently have been in only. It was just trying to see what is possible. I mean, no, knowing it's possible, but really trying to see if it is possible in terms of completion and deliver for something to be taken seriously. And at the same time, it was kind of trolling, like what? why the fuck did these guys make an acoustic album?
Hmm. You said reviews have been positive, but what about general response, and how does that affect you as as a black metal musician, as an experimental artist? How does critical or peer feedback, positive or negative, affect your feelings about an album?
Yeah, it's positive in terms of maybe helping other people understand that there are other means to create similar results. Um, so the feedback's been positive because it's a okay. Well, people are a little more open-minded, maybe, to this stuff. I'm sure there's the opposite. We just don't hear it.
Right.
And it's also positive that for the first time, we've actually sold the most CDs that I've ever sold in the States because CDs don't sell here. I know the
Hmm.
CDs sell in Japan and Europe, which is amazing because I love CDs. But overall, I think it's 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 kind of just changed. Even though I have a direct involvement in it, it's really helped me see possibility in how an approach, and I hope it motivates more people to on a live level to do this acoustically.
I am not like I'm not a black metal lifer. I didn't grow up with metal or punk really at all, and somehow I got into noise, and then through noise I learned about black metal and had some very, very obsessed years with it. But I'm not like,
Yeah,
I kind of acknowledge that I'm a tourist, and that's, I came from the other side of it, and I didn't come up through the metal tradition and then arrive at black metal or arrive at extreme metal. I kind of came from the avant-garde or noisy side, and then kind of like went back down the hill to the
yeah,
more getting into the more traditional metal stuff a bit. Um, but I mean, black metal in itself. So that's precursor to me talking about metal, because I might say things that are inaccurate or wrong or ignorant or whatever. But black metal itself, is, I think you could hear it and not even understand that it's metal if you didn't, if you have an idea of what metal music is and you don't really know about noise or avant-garde music or experimental music, you could hear some very traditional black metal that's not, you know, quote unquote experimental, kind of very traditional stuff like early black metal, and just think this is truly noise. I mean, the blast beats are played in a way that you can't even tell which, time signature it's in. Oftentimes, guitars totally like tinny and distorted, and uh, some of it is really, really, truly noise. I still
yeah.
feel that way, um, in its nature. Yet, it doesn't. A lot of it, a lot of that stuff doesn't seem to have like an inherent connection to, or even maybe knowledge of, like noise music or avant-garde music. It's just, it came out that way somehow. It's like it's noisy for different reasons. Blasphemy is super
Hmm.
noisy. Just some stuff is just insanely chaotic and noisy. Early Beharit is just like pure noise, actually. I mean,
Yeah,
after you hear it for a while, you pick out where the chord changes are, and things like that. But there's then a conscious melding of that noisiness and bringing electronic elements into it. But there's also a school of metal that like totally rejects this kind of avant-garde look at black metal. What do you see the similarities between them and the uses for noise, and just kind of your experience with the noisiness and the rawness of black metal?
I think it's atmosphere. It's atmosphere and maybe raw emotion. For me, it was punk and metal, and then noise.
Right.
And first noise I heard was actually very structured. The first noise album I ever heard. It was a Wolf Eyes promo that
Hmm.
we received at my job at Tower Records. It was was that the first album on Sub Pop, I believe.
Hmm.
Well, you know what? Let me take a step back. Would you consider Earth 2 by Earth kind of a noise album?
Mm, I don't know Earth well enough, but I have heard some of their early. I mean, I don't know that album specifically well enough, but the early stuff that I've heard from them is like very drony and very
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it's pretty abstract and distorted. Yeah, I think just hearing some of the details within metal, and even some like hardcore and punk, especially the guitar feedback,
Yeah,
and in the live arena, when we hear just the rawness of the feedback, I think that's kind of the missing vein right there, and maybe like the stepping stone. For me, it was just hearing that skating detail and wanting to bring it to the forefront. And I think for a lot of people who do embrace both, that's the appeal. It's there's that underlying element early on. You mentioned Beharit. I think it's they just probably didn't have access to equipment, or maybe they had access to the same equipment that the noise guys had. Ultimately, I think it's just shitty equipment and technique, or maybe we could just say honest technique, because
yeah, yeah.
it's
But it's so fascinating that they
there's
made these recordings and that they listened to them and thought,
yeah.
hey, this is good enough that we want to listen, we want to release this, and then other people heard them and thought, we love this. I mean, it's like really crazy music. I mean, that stuff is really crazy music.
Yeah, it's insane. All of that stuff that you mentioned is insane. And I think Wu-Tang Clan's 36 Chambers, for example,
Sure.
people to this day still talk about it. They will say nothing is ever going to touch the atmosphere of this. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the technology that was available, the maybe amateurish approach. I'm not downplaying that album's amazing. But there is an undeniable atmosphere in there that people are trying to replicate, and it's the same thing that exists within these genres we're talking about. It's just it comes down to atmosphere, and intention that I think.
Atmosphere and I think power and chaos. I think this is also another kind of like example or argument for why I think the essence of noise is not something that is so um actually far off or like intellectually difficult for people to like, or I think the term noise and kind of treating it in this sense gets people looking at it a certain way. But I think you go to a rock concert and the screeching feedback, or like those just fucked up out of tune solos that are just chaos, and ev-
Amazing.
everyone loves those. I mean, not everyone loves those, but I mean, a lot of people love that stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
that really speaks to a lot of people on a really deep level,
yeah,
and it's touching the same thing that noise does for people who've really discovered it and figured it out and like realize, okay, you can really channel this and focus on it and enjoy it. But I think people's kind of preconceptions of it also prevent them from really wanting to go all the way there. Whereas I think it could be something they would love if they were if they were allowed to, sort of, or if they allowed themselves to.
yeah. No, that's interesting that you say that, because in the band context, when you hear that unhinged feedback, and you see the guys kind of losing it on stage, and you hear these high pitched squeals and just string bends, it's the convention collapsing, right? The
Yeah.
structure of the song, what an expectation. And I think when you have somebody and one person usually on stage or in a mirror making similar sound, it's like, whoa, this is wild. And that was, I know that was my initial reaction. It was, I know that sound, not from this subcultural output, but from like some band just like smashing their guitars.
Yeah.
Yeah, it you know what, it's so similar. Uh, but I think noise and power electronics definitely channel that brutality. almost
I-
exclusively. And the crowds are equally devoted to. You're gonna have a room either packed or just a handful of people who are just
yeah.
in it.
I think maybe it's the difference between like in the live setting, the band, the feedback, the chaos is like walking the tightrope and almost losing balance and falling off the edge, but not keeping it together, not falling off the edge, and like noise is then just jumping off the edge and being not having
Oh
to be
yeah,
tethered to, and that is hard for people to want to do or to embrace.
yeah. No, noise is definitely falling off the edge because it shakes the pageantry of metal, especially black metal. And then you hide these guys in costumes and corpse paint, or even like in any other metal genre. It's it's all pageantry. And then you go to a noise show, it's some guy who probably just got off, work. He
Hmm.
has a suitcase plugged in. It's always interesting to look at it from, a psychological perspective.
What role does black metal play today in in society, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I think to sell t-shirts. I don't know. Um, there's still a lot of black metal bands, still a lot of black metal labels, and that's awesome. And there's still some long-standing projects that are active. But what role does it play in society? I think it's still an art form, and I think that was probably the most untrue thing somebody could say, that it's an art form, but it is, and I think it's just another form of escapism for people. So like noise or any other subcultural genre. It's just something for people to connect with, something that resonates with people. And I don't think it has the same potency that it did in the '90s.
Yeah.
You know, where people wanted to really, because it's at this point, I don't think it would exist at this point, or maybe it would exist, maybe it does exist, and in a more extreme and mutated level. I don't know, but it just wouldn't. People people are not going to walk around and burn churches and murder their friends anymore. That it can.
Can you tell me what the name SUTEKH HEXEN, where that name comes from?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming. So when the band had formed, or it wasn't even a band, it was never supposed to be a band. We was kind of trying to entertain ourselves in outputting extremity. But there was a point where we thought we should have a name for this. We thought, oh, Hexen, because there's that old film from the, I think, 30s,
Right.
Hexen.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, really cool, but it wasn't evil enough. So what else? What else should we throw in there? So I was like, okay, it can't be too obvious. Um, so that set, the Egyptian equivalent of that Satan, um, but or but Set has more associations, storms and travelers. He's the god of storms and travelers and wander and chaos, actually. So it's basically a marriage of Egyptian mythology, uh, or an Egyptian deity, and Hexen, the German word for witches.
Hmm.
Because these are all things that were just fascinating, and the music itself was a marriage of different, you know sonic qualities.
Hmm.
So it just made sense
Hmm.
at that time. We were just about the unification of all these extremities.
Are there any specific spiritual practices or philosophical traditions that SUTEKH HEXEN like works within or wants to express or channels?
It's very chaotic, but there's no prerequisites. Everybody involved comes from a very different spiritual and religious background, which is maybe part of that chaos. And we do talk about these things, but it's I think that aids to the process.
I mean, would you say it's a collective approach?
I would say so. I would certainly say so.
There's really been a wild, diverse group, variety of people that have been contributing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. Especially live in a collective. The best thing that could happen is you learn new technique and how to approach things from each other, because everybody, no matter, even if you have the same record collection, you wear the same shoes, etc., but everybody approaches this differently, and it's always amazing to me. And it's some people have been more compatible, some people have been just an absolute nightmare to just exist with. Right now, it's probably the best it's ever been.
Cool.
We're very different people at the same time, but I think that's kind of the magic.
Yeah, it was cool, Sam, talking about how he had learned to play like guitar and other kind of traditional instruments from being in the band. Because I was under the impression that he was doing, I heard he was playing with you now that he was doing kind of Crawl of Time.
Yeah.
In collaboration with what you were doing, kind of, side by side. But he told me he's really playing instruments that he's never really done before.
He kind of shocked us all. We were recording, and I was doing something, probably just listening to playback, and Sam asked, "Hey, Kevin, can I see your guitar?"
This is the end of part 1 of the episode with Kevin Yuen of SUTEKH HEXEN. In the full version, we go on to discuss the dynamics of collaboration, artistic influences, graphic design and noise packaging, navigating genres and audience perception, taking a step back from guitar and its impact on the creative process, top 5 noise records of all time, and much more. To watch or listen to the full episode, go to patreon.com/whitecentipedeNoise.